Most people remember the Flintstones as a harmless cartoon. Bright colors, simple jokes, a goofy Stone Age family living a modern life. But what if that memory is incomplete? What if behind the laughter, there was something far darker, something almost completely erased from history? Because the truth is, the Flintstones didn't start as a children's show. It started with cigarettes. And by the time people realized what was happening, it was already too late. When the Flintstones first appeared on television in 1960, it wasn't designed for kids sitting cross-legged in front of the TV after school. It was built for adults, specifically primetime audiences who had just finished dinner and were settling in for the evening. The inspiration was clear. At its core, the show mirrored the rhythm, humor, and dynamic of the Honeymooners. You had the loud, impulsive husband, the loyal but slightly clueless best friend, and the two patient wives holding everything together. Only this time, everything was wrapped in stone. Stone houses, stone cars, stone appliances powered by birds and dinosaurs. It was familiar, but just different enough to feel new. And that was exactly the point. Long before Fred Flintstone ever shouted his famous catchphrases, the minds behind the show, William Hanna and Joseph Barbera, were already giants in animation. At MGM, they had created Tom and Jerry, one of the most successful animated series of all time. Their work earned multiple Academy Awards and defined an era of theatrical cartoons. But in 1957, everything collapsed. MGM shut down its animation department. Just like that, the future they had built disappeared. Forced to adapt, Hanna and Barbera turned to television, a space that many animators at the time saw as a downgrade. The budgets were smaller, the schedules were tighter, and the expectations were lower. Still, they pushed forward, creating shows like The Huckleberry Hound Show. It kept the lights on, but something was missing. Their work had become smaller. More importantly, it had become labeled as just for kids. And they hated that. They didn't want to be known only as creators of children's entertainment. They wanted to prove animation could stand alongside live-action sitcoms in prime time. So, they began searching for something bigger. The early ideas were scattered and uncertain. Different settings were explored. Ancient Rome, rural hillbilly towns, even early American settlers. Nothing quite clicked. Everything felt like a variation of something that already existed. Then, almost unexpectedly, a simple idea changed everything. Set it in the Stone Age. It sounded strange at first, but once the idea took shape, everything began to fall into place. A prehistoric world that mirrored modern life. Dinosaurs as household tools. Birds acting as record players. Mammoths serving as vacuum cleaners. It was absurd, but it worked. From there, the characters slowly came to life. Fred, Wilma, Barney, Betty, not wild or chaotic, but clean, relatable, and grounded. Even in a world of rocks and fossils, they felt like real people. But even with a strong concept, the show nearly didn't happen. Selling the idea proved exhausting. Joseph Barbera spent weeks traveling from meeting to meeting, pitching the show to skeptical executives who didn't believe adults would watch a cartoon in prime time. Rejection after rejection piled up. By the end of it, he was ready to give up. Then, on the very last day, one final pitch changed everything. ABC said yes. That single decision launched what would become one of the most iconic shows in television history. But almost immediately, something unusual began to happen. Because this wasn't just a sitcom, it was also an advertisement. During its early run, the Flintstones was sponsored by Winston Cigarettes. And this wasn't subtle product placement hidden in the background. It was direct, open, unavoidable. Fred and Barney didn't just exist in the show. They stepped outside of it to sell cigarettes directly to the audience. They lit them, smoked them, laughed about them. They even sang jingles praising how good they tasted. In some segments, the characters would sneak away from their wives just to enjoy a smoke together. In others, Fred casually handed a cigarette to Wilma. These moments weren't treated as strange or controversial. They were normal, even charming. At the time, no one thought much of it. Smoking was everywhere, on television, in movies, in advertisements. It was part of everyday life. But looking back, those scenes feel unsettling. Because of what came next, every single original voice actor from the show eventually died from smoking-related illnesses, one after another. The voice of Fred, gone. Barney, gone. Wilma, Betty, all of them. Different times, different circumstances, but the same underlying cause. What once felt like harmless advertising suddenly carried a darker weight. The cheerful jingles, the casual jokes, the shared cigarettes, they weren't just part of the show anymore. They became part of its legacy. Over time, those original commercials quietly disappeared, removed from reruns, cut from broadcasts, forgotten by newer audiences. It was as if the show itself was trying to rewrite its own history. But the story didn't stop there. Because behind the scenes, things were just as complicated. The success of the Flintstones brought fame, but not always fairness. Some actors were paid far less than their contributions were worth. One key performer accepted a one-time payment instead of long-term royalties, a decision that would later haunt them as the show exploded in global popularity. Episodes aired across dozens of countries. Generations grew up watching the same characters, and with every broadcast, money continued to flow, just not to everyone who helped create it. There were also quiet departures, actors replaced without warning, roles reassigned without explanation. Some left for other opportunities, others were simply no longer called back. In an industry still finding its footing, stability was never guaranteed. Then came a turning point that would reshape the entire show. A baby. Originally, the writers planned for Fred and Wilma to have a son, but a toy company made a simple observation: baby girl dolls sold better. That single comment changed everything. The son became a daughter. Her name was Pebbles. What followed was one of the most successful marketing campaigns television had ever seen. Contests, advertisements, nationwide promotions. Millions of viewers tuned in to watch the birth episode. And within weeks, millions of Pebbles dolls were sold. But success came with a cost. The tone of the show began to shift. What started as an adult-oriented sitcom slowly transformed into something softer, safer, more child-focused. Sponsors changed. Storylines changed. And little by little, the original identity faded. By the later seasons, the difference was impossible to ignore. Strange new elements appeared. A super-strong baby with unexplained origins. A tiny floating alien called the Great Gazoo. Gazoo, in particular, marked a strange turning point. He didn't belong in Bedrock. He wasn't grounded in the everyday struggles that defined the show. Instead, he felt like something pulled from a completely different world, one filled with fantasy and science fiction. For many viewers, that was the moment the Flintstones lost its balance. The simple, relatable charm that once defined it was replaced by something more exaggerated, more disconnected. And yet, even as the tone shifted, traces of the original depth remained. Fred Flintstone, for example, wasn't always just a lovable goof. At times, he displayed behaviors that felt surprisingly real and surprisingly serious. His gambling habit appeared again and again throughout the series. It wasn't played purely for laughs. In some episodes, it became a genuine problem. He risked his paycheck, lost important savings, struggled to stop. At one point, it was even suggested that he had lost everything before and needed professional help. For a cartoon, especially in the early 1960s, this was unexpected. Beneath the humor, there were glimpses of real-life struggles. Addiction, financial stress, marital tension. And speaking of marriage, Fred and Wilma's relationship was far from perfect. Their arguments could be intense. Their conflicts felt real, sometimes uncomfortable. In one early storyline, Fred fakes an injury just to avoid spending time with his wife. In others, their disagreements escalate into physical comedy that in a different context might not feel so lighthearted. Years later, an even darker version of their relationship would appear in a little-known special, a version where the humor was stripped away, leaving behind something heavier, more serious, more raw. It aired once, and then it disappeared. As time went on, the Flintstones continued to evolve in unexpected ways. Some episodes were quietly removed from circulation due to outdated or offensive content. Others faded simply because they no longer fit the image the show wanted to present. But even as certain parts vanished, others grew stronger. The characters took on new life through merchandise. Vitamins shaped like Fred and Barney. Cereals like Fruity Pebbles and Cocoa Pebbles. Products that outlived the original series by decades. In many ways, the Flintstones became bigger after it ended. Not just a show, but a brand. A piece of cultural history that kept adapting, changing, surviving. Hollywood tried to revive it multiple times. A live-action film in the 1990s brought the characters back into the spotlight, achieving massive financial success despite mixed reviews. A sequel struggled to capture the same magic. Later attempts at reboots never fully took off. And yet, the original series remained. Still watched, still remembered, but not always fully understood. Because when you look closely, the world of Bedrock isn't as simple as it seems. Details change. Characters evolve. Certain elements appear and disappear without explanation. Even the setting itself feels inconsistent. Some fans have even suggested a strange theory. That Bedrock isn't the past at all, but the future. A world rebuilt after some unknown disaster. It sounds unlikely, but the clues are there, scattered throughout the series. Modern systems, advanced ideas, holidays that shouldn't exist yet. Small details that don't quite add up. Whether or not the theory is true, one thing is certain. The Flintstones is far more complex than it appears on the surface. It began as an experiment, a bold attempt to bring animation into prime time. It became a success, then a phenomenon, then something else entirely. A show that changed with its audience, a story that kept rewriting itself, a world that never stayed quite the same. And beneath it all, a history filled with strange decisions, unexpected consequences, and quiet details that most people never notice. Because once you start looking deeper into the Flintstones, it stops being just a cartoon and starts becoming something much harder to explain.